He was a powerful titan of industry, ruling over an empire of steel and silence. She was the gentle nanny hired to care for his grieving twins. He expected her to manage a schedule, but she managed to heal their broken hearts, including his own. A modern story of love found in the most unexpected place. Hello, bestie. Welcome. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. The black Bentley Mulsanne glided to a stop behind the 12-foot automated gates, its polished obsidian surface swallowing the last of the Lagos sunset. Inside, Chief Ademola Okonkwo massed his temples. The day's negotiations, a tense acquisition of a rival telecoms company, still crackling in the air around him like static. He had won, of course. He always won. But victory, these days, was a hollow, metallic taste in his mouth. The mansion awaited him, a breathtaking monument of glass and steel designed by a celebrated Italian architect. It was featured in international design magazines, a symbol of African luxury and success. To Ademola, it was a beautifully crafted tomb. He stepped out, his driver immediately disappearing with the car. The air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, a fragrance his wife, Chioma, had loved. She had personally overseen the landscaping, filling the grounds with color and life. Now, it felt like a tribute maintained by a groundskeeper, perfect and utterly soulless. His polished shoes clicked against the imported Italian marble of the grand foyer, the sound echoing in the vast, high-ceilinged space. The silence was the first thing that always greeted him. It was a thick, suffocating blanket, a stark contrast to the chaotic, honking energy of the city he had just left. "Welcome, sir," a soft voice murmured. It was Basid, the head housekeeper, materializing from a shadowed corridor. She took his briefcase and his suit jacket with practiced efficiency. "The children?" Ademola asked, his voice deeper and more tired than he intended. "They ate dinner, sir. They are in their rooms." Her tone was carefully neutral, but he heard the unspoken words. "They are quiet again. They asked for you, but we told them you were working." He nodded, a gesture of dismissal and acknowledgement. He climbed the sweeping staircase, its glass balustrade feeling cold under his hand. He passed walls adorned with expensive contemporary art, vibrant, explosive pieces that seemed to mock the stillness of the house. He paused outside the door to the children's wing. He could hear no sounds from within. No muffled giggles, no playful arguing. Not even the soft murmur of a bedtime story from the latest nanny. Just nothing. Pushing Toby's door open a crack, he saw his son sitting on the floor by the bed, not playing with the elaborate, untouched city of Lego models, but simply staring at a single ladybug crawling across the back of his hand. The boy didn't look up. Across the hall, Tola's room was a shrine to a little girl who was fading. Her ballet tutu was draped over a chair, unused for months. On her nightstand was a framed photograph of her and Chioma, their heads pressed together, laughing. Tola was lying on her bed, tracing the outline of her mother's face in the glass. Her small body curled into a tight, lonely ball. A physical ache, sharp and familiar, pierced Ademola's chest. This was his greatest failure. He could build empires, command boardrooms, and influence markets, but he could not break through the glass wall of grief that separated him from his own children. He was a curator of this museum of silence, preserving the artifacts of a life that had ended 2 years ago, utterly powerless to revive its spirit. The nannies, a procession of highly recommended, impeccably credentialed women from elite agencies in London and Johannesburg, had all failed. Some had been too strict, broken by the twins' silent rebellions. Others had been too permissive, trying to buy affection with sweets and leniency. All had been defeated by the profound, aching sadness that lived in these rooms. They were employees performing a function. They couldn't heal what was broken. Retreating to his study, he poured 2 fingers of aged Macallan, not for the taste, but for the burn. He sank into his leather chair, staring out at the glittering necklace of lights that was the Lekki Ikoyi link bridge. His world was a panorama of success. Yet the four walls of his own home felt like the smallest, most desolate place on earth. He was the king of a silent, empty castle, and his most treasured subjects were lost in a fog he could not navigate. The weight of it pressed down on him, a loneliness more vast than any ocean. The fifth nanny in as many months had left that morning. Her resignation, delivered via a perfunctory text message to the house manager, cited a family emergency, but the hastily packed suitcase and the refusal to collect her final month's bonus told the true story. Tola had hidden all her shoes. Toby had accidentally released a jar of tadpoles into her spotless ensuite bathroom. Ademola sat in his study, the Financial Times spread before him, the figures and charts a meaningless blur. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, a constant, sterile reminder of the void he was failing to fill. A sharp knock on the study door broke his reverie. Come? Mrs. Adeyemi, his cook of 15 years and the closest thing to a constant maternal presence in the house, entered. She wrung her hands in her apron, a sign of deep unease. Sir, she began, her voice hesitant. I am sorry to disturb. It's fine, Mrs. Adeyemi. What is it? He asked, his tone weary. It is about the situation. With the children. She took a breath, steeling herself. I know you are trying with these agencies. These Oyinbo women with their certificates. But a child's heart is not a business to be managed. Ademola leaned back, intrigued despite himself. Mrs. Adeyemi rarely offered unsolicited advice. What are you suggesting? My younger sister's daughter, sir. Ifeoma. She just finished her degree at Nsukka. First class in education. She is staying with me in Surulere while she looks for a teaching job. But the applications, they take time. She paused, choosing her words carefully. She is not from an agency. She is a village girl, but she has sense. Real sense. And she has a way with children. Calmness. Ademola almost dismissed her immediately. An unvetted, recent graduate? It sounded like a recipe for more disaster. But the desperation was a bitter taste on his tongue. The agencies had no one else to send for at least 2 weeks. The silence in the house was becoming unbearable. A calmness? He echoed, skepticism lacing his voice. My children have defeated calmer and more experienced women, Mrs. Adeyemi. Yes, sir, she conceded. But this one, her calm is different. It is not weakness. It is like a deep river, strong and steady. She is not looking for a career. She is just looking to help, to be useful while she waits. Perhaps that is what they need. Not a professional, but a person. The metaphor struck him. A deep river. His children were drowning in a stormy sea of their own grief. Perhaps a steady current was exactly what they needed to guide them to shore. Against his better judgment, worn down by exhaustion and hopelessness, he relented. Fine. Bring her tomorrow, 10 a.m. The next morning, at precisely 10 a.m., his secretary announced her arrival. Ademola remained behind his vast teak desk, intending to project an air of imposing authority, to set the terms immediately. When she entered, she defied every expectation. She wasn't the timid, wide-eyed girl Head pictured. Ifeoma was tall and graceful, dressed not in a formal suit, but in a well-tailored Ankara dress. Its deep indigo and gold pattern elegant yet practical. Her hair was braided neatly away from her face. She carried a simple leather satchel, not a flashy portfolio. But it was her demeanor that was most disarming. She wasn't cowed by the opulence of the office. She looked him in the eye, her gaze steady and intelligent, and offered a small, polite smile that didn't seem eager to please, but simply present. Good morning, Chief Okonkwo. Thank you for seeing me. Her voice was clear, her English perfect but softened by a melodic Igbo lilt. He launched into his rehearsed speech. Miss Ifeoma, the position is live-in. Your responsibilities would be… She gently interrupted, not with rudeness, but with a quiet focus that commanded attention. Sir, before the responsibilities, may I ask about Toby and Tola? He stopped, taken aback. No other nanny had asked about the children first. They'd asked about salary, hours, and vacation time. What about them? What are their favorite things? What does Toby do when he's happy? What does Tola do when she's sad? I have read a schedule on a tablet can tell me where they need to be, but it cannot tell me who they are. Her questions were simple, yet they felt more insightful than any psychological assessment had been given. They were questions about their essence, not their routine. They were the questions a mother would ask. He found himself answering, his CEO facade momentarily forgotten. Toby. He loves insects, draws them. He's quiet when he's happy, just observes. Tola. She used to dance. Now, when she's sad, she goes very still. She has her mother's picture. He trailed off, surprised at his own candor. Ifeoma simply nodded, her expression one of deep empathy, not pity. She understood the unspoken weight behind his words. She didn't promise miracles. She didn't list her qualifications. She simply said, "They sound like wonderful children who have been through a very difficult time. I would like to help if I can." In that moment, Chief Ademola Okonkwo, a man who negotiated based on data, projections, and leverage, made a decision based on a feeling. This was different. Her calm wasn't passive. It was a quiet strength. She wasn't here to perform a job. She was here to see his children. "The trial period is 1 month," he said, his voice returning to its businesslike tone, though the edge had softened. "Mrs. Adeyemi will show you to your room and give you the details." "Thank you, sir," Ifeoma said, that same steady calm in her eyes. "I will take good care of them." For the first time in 2 years, Ademola felt a faint, fragile flicker of something that felt like hope. Ifeoma's first day began with quiet observation. Mrs. Adeyemi showed her to a room far grander than anything in her Surulere flat, all cool linens and a balcony overlooking the pool. She unpacked her few belongings, her mind not on the luxury, but on the 2 small souls she had been hired to reach. She found them in the playroom, a space so meticulously organized it felt more like a store display than a place for children. Toby was on the floor, attempting to pry a battery compartment open on an expensive-looking robotic toy, his small face pinched in frustration. Tola was sitting perfectly still in a plush armchair, staring at a tablet showing a cartoon, but her eyes were glazed, uninterested. They looked up as she entered, their expressions a familiar blend of wariness and defiance. They were braced for a new authority figure, a new set of rules to test and break. Ifeoma didn't smile too widely or speak in a sickly sweet tone. She simply sat on the floor near Toby, maintaining a respectful distance. "That looks complicated," she said, her voice neutral. "Are you trying to see how it works?" Toby glanced at her, surprised she wasn't telling him to stop before he broke it. He gave a curt nod. "Sometimes the best way to learn is to take things apart," she said. "But maybe we should ask your dad if it's okay first. How about we find something else to explore for now?" She then turned to Tola. "That show. The colors are very bright, but it seems a bit loud. Do you ever get tired of it?" Tola's eyes focused slightly, a flicker of surprise that an adult had noticed. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug. Ifeoma looked around the pristine room. "This is a very nice room, but it feels very tidy. Did you know the best castles are never tidy? They have blankets everywhere for forts and cushions for throwing." This got a reaction. Toby stopped fiddling with the toy. Tola looked up from her tablet. "Fort?" Toby asked, suspicion in his voice. "The best kind," Ifeoma said, her eyes twinkling. "Impenetrable. But Wed needs supplies." She stood up and walked over to the large, immaculate sofa. She grabbed 3 large velvet cushions and let them tumble to the floor with a soft thump. The sound was shockingly disruptive in the quiet room. Tola gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. They weren't allowed to do that. Ifeoma then went to the linen cupboard in the hall, returning with a light cotton blanket. "Every fort needs a roof," she declared. She draped it precariously over the back of the sofa and the pile of cushions, creating a lopsided canopy. She crawled inside the makeshift structure and looked out at them. "Well, are you going to leave me to defend this castle from the dragon all by myself? I might need knights, or perhaps a princess with very good negotiating skills." There was a long, hesitant pause. Then, Toby, driven by curiosity and a longing for adventure, crawled in beside her. Tola, after a moment longer, slowly slid out of her chair and joined them, pulling the blanket down to make the space more enclosed, more secret. Inside the dim, fabric-walled world, the usual rules were suspended. Ifeoma didn't force conversation. She began to tell a story. It was an old Igbo folktale about the tortoise and the hare, but she told it like they'd never heard it before. And the hare, she said, her voice becoming a high-pitched, boastful squeak. He was so sure of himself, he started doing this under. So she wiggled her fingers by her ears, making a silly face. Toby let out a snort. The tortoise became a slow, deep, cunning voice. "Oh, Mr. Hare, you are so fast. But what is that over there?" Ifeoma's head moved with exaggerated slowness. She made the race a dramatic saga, the tortoise's family helping him by looking like rocks on the road, the hare taking a nap that involved comical snoring sounds. She painted pictures with her words, her hands moving, her face expressive. And then it happened, as she described the hare waking up to see the tortoise almost at the finish line. His eyes bulging out, Toby let out a real, unfettered giggle. It was a sound so pure and unexpected that it seemed to startle even him. A moment later, a genuine smile broke through Tola's usual solemn mask, and a light, breathy laugh escaped her lips. It was the symphony. The silly voices, the giggle, the breathy laugh, that Chief Ademola walked in on. He stood in the doorway unseen, his hand frozen on the knot of his tie. The scene was one of beautiful chaos. Cushions were strewn everywhere. A blanket was draped into a haphazard tent, and his children, his lost, sorrowful children, were curled up under it, their faces alight with a joy he thought had been extinguished forever. He saw the way they looked at Ifeoma, not with defiance or fear, but with rapt attention and dawning trust. He saw the ease with which she commanded the moment, not through authority, but through imagination. He made a small sound, and Ifeoma's eyes flicked up to his. For a second, he saw a flash of worry, that she had overstepped, that she had made a mess, that she would be fired on her first day. He saw the vulnerability beneath her calm. But all he could do was raise a hand, a gesture that said, "It's okay, continue." He couldn't trust his voice. He turned and walked away. The image of that fort, that ridiculous, wonderful fort, burned into his mind. The echo of their laughter followed him down the hall, a haunting, beautiful melody that left him feeling more alone than ever, yet simultaneously, for the first time in years, not alone at all. Something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the museum's silence, and light was pouring in. The fort became a nightly ritual. The playroom's pristine order was, by unspoken agreement with Ifeoma, allowed to dissolve into a comfortable chaos each afternoon. Ademola began to notice subtle changes, not just in the environment, but in the very atmosphere of the house. The air felt lighter, less charged with unspoken sorrow. He found himself on a Wednesday evening, standing at the door of the formal dining room, a room that had hosted governors and celebrities, but which now felt cold and impersonal. He watched Basid set the long, gleaming mahogany table with 3 places. The twins would eat earlier with Ifeoma in the kitchen nook, a cozy space they had claimed as their own. He would eat alone here, as always, with a financial report for company. A wave of profound loneliness washed over him. The clink of fine china sounded hollow. He turned to Basid. "Set 2 more places. In the kitchen. We will eat there tonight." Bozda's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch before her professional mask slid back into place. "Of course, sir." When he walked into the kitchen nook, the twins looked up, startled. Toby had a smear of stew near his mouth. Tola was mid-giggle about something Ifeoma had said. "Daddy?" Tola said, her smile fading into uncertainty. "Are you eating with us?" "If that's all right," he said, feeling uncharacteristically awkward. He pulled out a chair at the small, round table, its surface already littered with the happy evidence of their meal. Ifeoma met his gaze, a question in her eyes, but she simply smiled and rose. "Let me get you a plate, sir." Ademola, he said quietly. Please call me Ademola when we are like this. The formality suddenly felt like a barrier he desperately wanted to dismantle. Ifeoma paused, then nodded. Ademola. The meal was not silent. Ifeoma gently steered the conversation. Toby was just telling me about the praying mantis he saw in the garden today. He says it was as green as a fresh leaf. Toby, usually so reticent around his father, looked down at his plate, but a small smile played on his lips. It waved its arms at me, he mumbled. It did? Ademola asked, genuinely trying to engage. What do you think it was saying? Toby looked up, surprised his father was playing along. I think it was telling me to go away from its spot. A real conversation, however small, blossomed. Ifeoma did the same with Tola, drawing out a story about a new dance step she was practicing. The clinking of cutlery was accompanied by soft laughter and easy chatter. Ademola mostly listened, a spectator to this easy intimacy he craved to be part of. Later that week, he came home to find the twins' bedroom doors open. He usually avoided them, the sight of their solitary activities too painful. But a sound from Tola's room drew him in. Ifeoma was sitting on the edge of the bed, and Tola was kneeling beside her. The large leather-bound photo album opened between them. Ademola's heart seized. That album was Chioma's project, filled with pictures from their wedding, the twins' births, Christmases, birthdays. After her death, it had been put on a high shelf, too painful to look at. Head assumed the children had forgotten it. He braced himself for tears, for the raw grief that usually followed any mention of their mother. But the scene was different. Tola's small finger was pointing at a picture of Chioma, radiant in a brilliant blue gelly, laughing as she held a chubby, 1-year-old Toby aloft. Tell me about this day, Ifeoma asked softly, her voice warm with curiosity, not somber with pity. Your mum's smile is so beautiful here. Was it a party? Tola nodded, her expression thoughtful, not sad. It was Auntie Neka's wedding. Mummy danced so much. Her beads made so much noise. A tiny smile touched Tola's lips. She let me play with her necklace after. She looks like a queen, Ifeoma said. And look at Toby. He looks like he's about to take flight. Toby, who had been hovering in the doorway, came in to look. I was crying before that picture, he announced. The music was too loud. Ah, Ifeoma said, nodding sagely. A man who knows his own mind. Even then, Ademola leaned against the doorframe, his throat tight. Ifeoma wasn't avoiding Chioma's memory. She was gently, carefully, integrating it back into their lives. She was turning their mother from a ghost whose name was spoken in whispers into a real, vibrant person who laughed, danced, and wore noisy beads. She was giving them permission to remember her with joy, not just pain. He saw Tola trace her mother's face in the photograph again. But this time, it wasn't a gesture of longing. It was a gesture of connection. Ifeoma looked up and saw him. Her expression was gentle, understanding. She hadn't asked for permission to do this. She had simply known it needed to be done. In that moment, Ademola didn't see an employee overstepping a boundary. He saw a woman healing his family, and the gratitude that swelled in his chest was so immense it was almost frightening. She was not just caring for his children. She was lovingly reassembling the pieces of their shattered world. The downpour was sudden and violent, a classic Lagos deluge that turned roads into rivers and skies into a bruised, twilight gray. Ademola was in the back of the Bentley, scrolling through emails, when his phone buzzed. It was his driver, Gabriel, his voice strained. Oga, sorry sir. The Danfo way just fall for road. Idan block us completely for I corridor road. No movement at all. I know fit reach school in time for pickup. A flash of irritation, quickly followed by a spike of anxiety, shot through Ademola. The twins hated being late. They hated the feeling of being the last ones waiting. Don't worry, Gabriel. Stay safe. He'll handle it. He rarely drove himself anywhere in the city, but the bulletproof Range Rover was in the garage. For the first time in years, Chief Ademola Okonkwo found himself behind the wheel, navigating the chaotic, flood-prone streets. the wipers fighting a losing battle against the sheets of rain. The usual 20-minute journey took 45, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He finally pulled up to the prestigious Greensprings School, its manicured grounds now a quagmire. A line of sleek SUVs and sedans snaked through the pickup lane, nannies and drivers huddled under umbrellas. He couldn't see his children. Parking hastily, he grabbed an umbrella and strode towards the primary section gate. His expensive leather shoes instantly soaked. And then he saw them. They were under the scant cover of a flamboyant tree, but it was offering little protection. Ifeoma had positioned herself like a shield, trying to hold her own small umbrella over both children. But the scene wasn't one of simple waiting. A taller boy, maybe 8 years old, was pointing and laughing. "Your bag is floating," he jeered. At his feet, Tola's pink sequined backpack lay submerged in a deep, muddy puddle. Its contents: colorful textbooks, a glittery pencil case, a folded drawing, spreading out like a sad, sinking flower. Tola was crying, silent tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. Toby stood rigid, his small fists clenched, his face a mask of impotent fury. He looked like he was about to launch himself at the bigger boy. Consequences be damned. Ademila saw red. A primal, protective rage surged through him. This little brute was mocking his daughter, humiliating her. He took a step forward, his body coiling, ready to intervene with the full, terrifying force of his authority. He would freeze the boy with a look, summon the head teacher, ensure the child's parents heard about this in a way they would never forget. But Ifeoma moved first. She didn't look up and see Ademila. Her entire focus was on the children. She didn't shout. She didn't even acknowledge the bully directly at first. She simply knelt down, right there in the mud, the rain soaking through her dress, and put her arms around Tola, pulling her close and using her own body to block the boy's view. "Shoo, NWM," she murmured, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the storm. "It's only water. It's only a bag. We can dry the books. The bag can be washed. Look at me." She gently tilted Tola's chin up. "Your tears are more precious than that puddle. Don't waste them on this." Tola's sobs began to quiet, her wide eyes fixed on Ifeoma's calm face. Only then did Ifeoma turn her head to look at the boy. Her expression wasn't angry. It was deeply disappointed, which was somehow far more powerful. She looked at him not as a monster, but as a child who had made a poor choice. "You," she said, her voice clear and carrying over the drumming rain. "That was her favorite bag. How would you feel if someone threw your football into the lagoon?" The boy's smirk faltered. He shuffled his feet, suddenly unable to meet her gaze. The power dynamic had utterly shifted. Her quiet dignity had disarmed him more effectively than any shouting could have. "Now," Ifeoma continued, her tone leaving no room for argument, "you will help Toby fish her things out of the water." The boy, chastened, muttered a reluctant sorry, and bent down with a sullen Toby to retrieve the soggy books. Ifeoma turned her attention back to Tola, speaking softly. "See? Problem is just something waiting for a solution. Let's be the solution. We will take these books home and lay them out carefully. They will have a crinkly, adventurous story to tell. A book that has survived a flood is a brave book." Ademila stood frozen. His rage evaporated, replaced by a awe so profound it left him breathless. He had been ready to unleash a sledgehammer. She had applied a precise, healing touch. She had protected Tola's heart, addressed the bully not with violence but with consequence and a lesson in empathy, and had even given Toby a task to channel his anger. He saw not a nanny doing a job, but a protector, a teacher, a nurturer of the highest order. In that moment, kneeling in the mud in the pouring rain, she was the most powerful person he had ever seen. He finally stepped forward, opening the umbrella over them. "The car is this way," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Ifeoma looked up, surprised to see him, but her calm never wavered. She simply nodded, gathered the damp, rescued belongings, and shepherded the twins toward the Range Rover, leaving the humbled bully standing alone in the rain. As he drove them home, the car filled with the smell of wet earth and the twins' quiet chatter about brave books. Ademola could only steal glances at Ifeoma in the passenger seat. The feeling that bloomed in his chest was terrifying in its intensity. It was respect, it was gratitude, and it was something else entirely, something far more dangerous and exhilarating. He was falling in love with her, and the realization was as startling and undeniable as the crash of thunder that shook the sky. A subtle but seismic shift occurred within Ademola after the incident in the rain. The professional distance he had so carefully maintained began to feel like a lie, a flimsy curtain hiding a stage that was being utterly transformed. He started to choreograph his days around glimpses of her, his schedule suddenly flexible in ways that would have baffled his executive assistant. He began arriving home not at 8, but at 6:30, claiming he needed to cut down on stress. He'd linger in the hallway, pretending to check mail on his phone, just to hear the sound of Ifeoma's voice from the kitchen, explaining a math problem to Toby or discussing the plot of a book with Tola. One evening, he found her in his personal library, a room he rarely used. She was standing by a high shelf, running her finger along the spine of a leather-bound copy of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. She wasn't aware of his presence, and he watched her, captivated by the look of focused curiosity on her face. She pulled the book down, opened it carefully, and began to read, her brow slightly furrowed. The sight of her, so intellectually engaged in his space, sent a strange thrill through him. "It's a first edition," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She started, snapping the book shut gently as if caught doing something wrong. "Sir, I'm sorry. I was just—" "It's meant to be read," he interrupted, walking closer. "Not just displayed. What do you think of it?" She looked down at the book in her hands, then back at him, her initial nervousness replaced by genuine thought. I think it's about the danger of a single story. About a man who is so strong, he doesn't see how the world is changing until it's too late." She paused. "It's very sad, but important." Her analysis was simple, yet it cut to the novel's core. They talked for 10 minutes about literature, about Nigerian authors, and he found himself arguing a point not to win, but just to hear her thoughtful counterargument. It was the most stimulating conversation Head had in his own home in years. The most significant breach in his armor came on a Saturday. Mrs. Adeyemi had mentioned offhand that the twins had been asking to go to the beach for months. The beach. Chioma had loved the beach. They had spent countless Sundays at Tarkwa Bay, building sandcastles, the air filled with her laughter. Since her death, the idea had been too painful to contemplate. But that morning, watching Tola trace a picture of a seashell in a book, he felt a sudden, reckless impulse. "Get your things," he announced, startling them all. "We're going to the beach." The twins stared at him, dumbfounded. Ifeoma looked at him, a question in her eyes, a silent check-in. "Are you sure?" He wasn't, but he nodded. The journey was quiet, the twins' excitement tempered with a palpable nervousness. The beach was not the secluded Tarkwa Bay of his memories, but a more public one, bustling with families. The smell of salt water and roasting plantain hit him like a physical blow, each sensation a ghost of a happier time. For the first hour, he stood apart, a solitary figure in linen trousers and a polo shirt, watching as Ifeoma shepherded the twins toward the water's edge. He saw their hesitation, their memories of this place intertwined with their mother. But Ifeoma was patient. She didn't push. She simply took off her sandals, let the waves wash over her feet, and laughed as the cold water hit her ankles. Toby followed first, then Tola. Soon, they were squealing, chasing the receding waves and running from the incoming ones. The sound was a direct assault on his heart, both painful and healing. Then he saw Ifeoma drop to her knees and start digging. She was helping Toby, her focus absolute, her hands moving with purpose. They were building an elaborate sandcastle, complete with a moat. A large wave rushed in, collapsing one of the walls. Toby's face fell, ready to give up. But Ifeoma just laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that carried on the wind straight to where Ademola stood. "A temporary setback," she declared, her voice full of mock drama. "The sea tests our resolve." We shall build it stronger. We shall build it higher. And she started again, her enthusiasm infectious. Toby joined in, his disappointment forgotten. Tola, watching them, ran up to Ademola and grabbed his hand. "Daddy, come. Help us. We need more moat diggers." He allowed himself to be pulled across the sand. He knelt, feeling the grit under his knees, the sun on his neck. Ifeoma looked up, her face glowing, sand on her cheek. She smiled at him, and it wasn't the polite smile of an employee. It was a smile of shared, silly joy. Their hands brushed as they both reached for a clump of wet sand to fortify a tower. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure sensation that had nothing to do with the ocean and everything to do with her. He froze for a second, his eyes locking with hers. In that moment, on his knees in the sand, with the sound of his children's laughter in his ears and the warmth of her skin lingering on his, the last of his defenses crumbled. The armor he had worn for 2 years, forged in grief and polished by duty, shattered. The feeling was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the most alive he had felt since he could remember. He was no longer just a billionaire watching his nanny. He was a man, falling hopelessly and irrevocably in love. The change in the household atmosphere was too profound to go unnoticed. It was in the air, a new frequency of warmth and ease that hummed through the once silent halls. Basid and the other staff exchanged knowing glances when Ademola began consistently arriving home before sunset. They noticed how Head sometimes bring a book into the living room in the evening, not to read, but to sit in an armchair, seemingly content to just listen to the sounds of Ifeoma and the children playing. The first external warning came from his mother. Mom and Ketchy arrived unannounced one Tuesday afternoon, a habit she reserved for moments when her mother's intuition was tingling. She found them not in the formal sitting room, but in the garden. Ifeoma was on a blanket, helping Tola plait daisy chains into her hair, while Toby excitedly explained the hunting techniques of the praying mantis to a patiently listening Ademola, who was leaning against a tree, his suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up. Mom and Ketchy observed from the patio for a full 5 minutes, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The ease in her son's posture, the adoring way Tola looked at Ifeoma, the way Ademola's gaze kept drifting back to the young woman on the blanket. Dinner was a quiet affair. The twins, sensing their grandmother's formidable presence, were on their best behavior. Ifeoma, perceptive as always, excused herself to help Mrs. Adeyemi in the kitchen, leaving the family alone. Later, Mama Nkechi followed Ademola into his study. She accepted a small glass of brandy and settled into the chair opposite his desk, her posture regal. "The children look well," she began, her tone neutral. "There is color in their cheeks." Tola laughed at my joke. A real laugh. "They are doing better," Ademola agreed, cautious. "It is the girl," his mother stated, not a question. "Ifeoma. She has a good spirit. She is not like the others. She sees them. She is maternal." Ademola remained silent, swirling the brandy in his glass. Mama Nkechi leaned forward, her voice dropping, losing its softness. "But be careful, Nwam. Look at me." He met her gaze. "You are a chief, a lion. This girl. She is good, but she is from a different world. She is the help. Lagos has sharp, sharp teeth, and it loves nothing more than to bite a lion who forgets his pride. The society pages, your business partners. They will not see a love story. They will see a scandal. They will see a weakness to exploit, and they will chew her up and spit her out to get to you. Think with your head, my son, not just your heart. Your heart has been lonely. It is not always a wise guide." Her words were a bucket of ice water. They were not born of malice, but of a brutal, pragmatic love. She had seen the direction of his gaze, the unguarded softness in his eyes, and she was trying to arm him against the inevitable onslaught. The next test came from his world. At a high-powered charity gala 2 days later, he was surrounded by the usual suspects: oil magnates, banking executives, and their impeccably groomed wives. He was making small talk with Tun Jacobs, a business associate known for his sharp tongue and love of gossip. "Ademola, you're looking relaxed," Tun said, a smirk playing on his lips. less stressed. I hear you've finally found a nanny who can handle the little terrors. And quite a looker from what my wife's friends are saying. The pretty young thing from the village working her magic. Eh? He nudged Ademila with his elbow. A crude, knowing gesture. The comment felt like a violation. It reduced Ifeoma's profound impact, her intelligence, her grace, to a cheap cliché. It soiled something sacred. Ademila's affable expression vanished. The temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. He turned to face Tund fully, and the full force of his presence, the cold authority he usually reserved for boardroom adversaries, was suddenly focused on one man. Tund, he said, his voice low, quiet, and lethally calm. You will not speak about what happens in my home. You will not speak about my children. And you will certainly never speak about Miss Ifeoma in that tone again. Are we understood? Tund's smirk melted into stunned embarrassment. He took a half-step back, sputtering an apology. Ademila, I didn't mean. It was just a joke. It wasn't funny, Ademila stated, his gaze not wavering until Tund looked away, thoroughly chastened. He then turned and walked away, leaving a pocket of awkward silence in his wake. He had drawn a line, publicly, but the encounter left him rattled. His mother's warning echoed in his mind. This was just the beginning. The whispers had started. He couldn't shield Ifeoma from this world forever, and the thought of its cruelty touching her filled him with a protective fury. That night, he tried to retreat. He buried himself in a contract review, attempting to douse the feelings Ifeoma ignited with the cold water of logic and his mother's warning. But it was useless. His mind kept returning to her smile on the beach, the sound of her laughter, the intelligent light in her eyes when she discussed a book. The conflict was a war within him, and his heart was winning every battle. The armor was off, and he was terrifyingly, wonderfully exposed. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon finally broke with a vengeance that night. It wasn't just rain. It was a celestial fury, with thunder cracking like gunshots and lightning stitching the black sky with electric veins. The violent weather mirrored the turmoil in Ademila's heart, keeping him awake long after the house had fallen silent. He was pacing in his study, a half-finished glass of whiskey forgotten on his desk, when a soft, frantic knock pierced the rumble of the storm. It was Basid, her usual composure shattered, her eyes wide with fear. Sir, come quick. It's Master Toby. Ademila's blood ran cold. He was out of the study and sprinting down the hall before she could say another word. The scene in the children's room was one of controlled panic. A junior maid was hovering uselessly by the door, wringing her hands. Tola was sitting up in her own bed, her face pale and terrified, watching her brother. And Toby was thrashing on his bed, his small body engulfed in a heat so intense Ademila could feel it from the doorway. His pyjamas were soaked with sweat, his breathing a ragged, frightening rasp. His eyes were open but glazed, unseeing. The familiar, icy hand of helplessness seized Ademila's heart. This was his deepest fear. A crisis he couldn't control, a threat to his children he couldn't negotiate away. He stood frozen in the doorway, a billionaire rendered impotent by a virus, his mind blank with a terror that was every parent's nightmare. Then Ifeoma was there. She must have been woken by the commotion. She wore a simple cotton wrapper, her hair tied back hastily. She didn't look at Ademila, didn't register the panic of the staff. Her entire world had narrowed to the small, burning boy on the bed. Toby, NWM. I'm here, she said, her voice a low, steady melody against the storm's dissonance. She moved with a calm urgency that was the antithesis of panic. She placed a cool hand on his forehead, her face tightening slightly at the heat. Basid, bring a basin of cool water and towels. Now please, she instructed, her tone leaving no room for question. And someone call Dr. Adebayo. Tell him it's a very high fever. Her orders broke the spell of paralysis. Basid scurried away. The maid by the door vanished to call the doctor. Ifeoma sat on the edge of the bed, gathering Toby's writhing body against her, murmuring softly into his hair. It was an Igbo lullaby, one Ademila hadn't heard since Chioma died. Her voice was a rock in the raging river of his delirium. She didn't flinch as his hot skin soaked through her wrapper. She was an anchor, holding him fast against the tide of the fever. Ademila could only watch, a statue of gratitude and awe. He fetched what she asked for, a glass of water, a fresh pillowcase. He was her assistant, following her quiet, confident lead. Hours bled together, marked only by the slowing rhythm of the storm and Toby's ragged breaths. At one point, the doctor arrived, examined Toby, administered medication, and left with assurances that the fever would break by morning. The staff, reassured, drifted back to their quarters. Finally, it was just the three of them in the dim room. A sleeping Tola, a dozing Toby whose fever had finally, blessedly, begun to recede, and an exhausted Iphioma who refused to leave his side. Ademila returned from seeing the doctor out. He stood in the doorway watching her. She was wiping Toby's brow with a damp cloth, her movements tender and infinite in their patience. The fear of the night began to recede, leaving behind a raw, vulnerable emotion. He went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea, his hands, which signed million-naira deals, shaking as he poured the hot water. He added a slice of ginger, the way Mrs. Adeyemi did for comfort. He brought it to her in the quiet room. Iphioma, he whispered, his voice rough with spent adrenaline and something else, something deeper. You should drink this. She looked up, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but still clear. She reached for the mug. Thank you, sir. Their fingers brushed during the exchange. It was not a dramatic touch. It was simple, practical. But in the hypersensitized silence of the post-crisis room, it felt like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, undiluted electricity passed between them, a connection so potent it was almost audible. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, charged with all the unspoken words, all the suppressed glances, all the emotion of the terrifying night. Their eyes locked. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls of employer and employee, of chief and nanny, vaporized. There was only a man and a woman, bound together by a shared fear for a child they both loved, by a night of intense vulnerability, and by a connection that could no longer be ignored. The storm outside had passed, but the one in the room had just begun to break. The world outside the children's room softened from pitch black to a deep, bruised gray, then to the fragile, pearlescent light of pre-dawn. The storm had exhausted itself, leaving behind a dripping, tranquil silence. Toby's breathing had evened out into the deep, regular rhythm of restorative sleep, his forehead cool to the touch. Tola had long since succumbed to exhaustion, her own fears quieted by her brother's calm. Iphioma moved stiffly, her muscles protesting hours of stillness. She carefully untangled herself from Toby, settling his head gently back onto the dry pillow. She felt hollowed out, drained by the vigil, but a profound sense of peace settled over her. The crisis was over. He was safe. She needed tea, something strong and bracing to shake off the remnants of the night's terror. She padded quietly down the grand staircase, the cold marble a shock against her bare feet. The mansion was utterly still, a world suspended in the blue-gray dawn. In the kitchen, she moved by rote, filling the kettle, finding the ginger, the familiar rituals a comfort. She was so lost in the simple task that she didn't hear him approach. Iphioma. His voice was like gravel, worn raw by the long night. She turned, surprised. Chief Ademila stood in the doorway, still dressed in the rumpled clothes from the night before. He looked older, the lines on his face etched deeper by worry and lack of sleep. But his eyes held a terrifying intensity. The usual veil of CEO detachment was gone, completely burned away. "Sir," she said automatically, her hand going to her wrapper, suddenly conscious of her disheveled state. "He's sleeping. The fever is gone." "I know. I checked." He took a step into the kitchen, and the room, which had always felt vast, suddenly felt impossibly small. The space between them crackled with the unspent energy from hours before. "I made tea," she said, gesturing lamely to the kettle, needing to break the tension, to re-establish some semblance of normalcy. He ignored it. He just looked at her, his gaze tracing the tired lines around her eyes, the way a stray curl had escaped her scarf. He seemed to be memorizing her. "What you did tonight," he began, then stopped, shaking his head as if words were inadequate. "What you have done since the day you arrived." He took another step closer. He was near enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with night air and anxiety. "You have done what I could not," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that was for her alone. "You walked into this museum of silence, and you did not just clean the glass. You threw open the windows. You let the air in. You let the life in." Ifeoma's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to look away, to retreat, but she was rooted to the spot, held captive by the raw emotion in his face. "You brought my children back to me," he continued, the words spilling out now, a dam breaking after years of restraint. "You taught them how to laugh again. You taught them how to remember their mother with joy, not just pain. You have—" He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of utter vulnerability she had never seen in him. "You have brought me back to life, and I have tried. God knows I have tried to ignore it, to be proper, to be the chief." He said the title with a bitter twist, as if it were a prison. "But I can't." The words were a confession, a surrender. "I know it is complicated. I know the world will talk. They will say terrible things. They will call you a gold digger and me a fool. But I cannot ignore what is in my heart any longer." He was directly in front of her now. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was its own embrace. "It is you, Ifeoma," he whispered, the sound raw and honest in the quiet kitchen. "It has only been you." The kettle began to whistle, a shrill, mundane sound that shattered the profound silence. Neither of them moved to stop it. Ifeoma just stared at him, her mind reeling. The fear, the practicality, the warnings from his mother and the outside world. They all screamed in her head. But her heart, traitorously, heard only the aching truth in his voice and felt the same terrifying, exhilarating pull. The whistle died as the kettle clicked off, leaving a silence even more deafening than before. The first true ray of morning sun broke through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes in the air and painting a stripe of gold across the floor between them, a line that had just been irrevocably crossed. The shrill whistle of the kettle faded into a dying hiss, the sound swallowed by the weight of his confession. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound, charged with the echo of his words. "It is you. It has only been you." Ifeoma stood frozen, the steam from the forgotten kettle curling between them like a ghost. Her mind, usually so clear and pragmatic, was a whirlwind. She saw the raw need in his eyes, the vulnerability he had shown to no one else. She felt the magnetic pull of him, of the life he was offering. A life where she wouldn't have to leave Toby and Tola, where the love she felt for them could extend, terrifyingly and beautifully, to their father. But she was not a foolish girl dazzled by wealth or a romantic fantasy. She was Ifeoma, who had studied hard for her degree, who valued her self-respect above all else. She had seen the sharp, judgmental world he moved in, and she knew her place in its hierarchy. An outsider, a convenience, a scandal waiting to happen. She took a slow, deliberate step back, creating a crucial foot of space between them. The physical distance helped her gather her thoughts, find her voice. She wrapped her arms around herself, not in fear, but in a gesture of grounding. "Ademola," she said, and using his name felt both intimate and necessary. His eyes flared with hope at the sound, but she pressed on, her voice soft yet unwavering. "What you feel, what I might feel." She acknowledged the possibility, and saw the shock of that acknowledgement register on his face. It cannot be a secret. It cannot be something whispered about in the kitchen or speculated on in the society pages. She held his gaze, her own filled with a fierce dignity. "My name is all I have. My reputation is not a luxury. It is my capital. I will not have it dragged through the mud as the nanny who seduced the billionaire. I will not have my family subjected to that kind of gossip." She saw the protest forming on his lips, the assurance that he would protect her, and she gently held up a hand. And more than me, more than you, are Toby and Tola. Their hearts are too fragile. They have just found stability. They trust me. They are starting to connect with you again. If this thing between us is not real, if it is just a reaction to a stressful night, it will shatter them. It would be a betrayal deeper than any we could imagine. She took a breath, laying out her terms not as demands, but as the non-negotiable foundations of her very being. If this is real, she said, her voice gaining strength, it must be done properly, with respect, not as a hidden affair but as a courtship. It must be done with time. Time for us to be sure. Time for the children to adjust. Time for the world to see that this is not a trivial fling, but something built on a foundation of mutual respect and care. She finished, her chest tight. She had just laid down conditions to one of the most powerful men in the country. She had essentially told him that his wealth and status were not advantages here, but potential obstacles. She had risked everything, her job, her home, her connection to the children, on the chance that he loved the woman she was, not the idea of her. Ademila stared at her, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she had misjudged him entirely, that his pride would rear up, that he would dismiss her concerns as the insecurities of a lesser woman. But then, something remarkable happened. The desperate hope in his eyes softened into something deeper, more profound. Respect. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, one that reached his eyes and carved out lines of true warmth and admiration. You see, he said, his voice filled with awe. This is why. This incredible strength. You think of everyone before yourself. You protect my children's hearts even as I am trying to claim yours. He did not try to close the distance. He nodded, a gesture of acceptance and understanding. You are right. Of course you are right. On all of it. He let out a breath, as if releasing the last of his impulsive desire. It will be done properly. It will be done with respect. And with time, we will move at a pace that is right for them. And for you. In that moment, he didn't love her despite her conditions. He loved her for them. Her wisdom hadn't pushed him away. It had drawn him in deeper, confirming that what he felt was not a passing fancy for a pretty face, but a profound recognition of a true partner. The courtship of Chief Ademila Okonkwo would not begin with diamonds or declarations in the press, but with a promise of patience, the most valuable currency he could offer. The grand reveal was not a single, explosive event, but a carefully orchestrated crescendo. Ademila, true to his word, handled it with the strategic precision of a corporate takeover, but guided by Ifeoma's unwavering sense of integrity. It began with a quiet, private dinner at his mother's house. Mama Nkechi, after a long, probing conversation with Ifeoma that covered everything from her family history to her views on child rearing, had finally given her gruff, invaluable blessing. She has a good head on her shoulders, she told her son later, and more backbone than any of those society girls you could have chosen. She will keep you grounded. It was the highest praise she could offer. Next, Ademila took Ifeoma and the twins to a public, but not overly scrutinized, event. A gallery opening for a renowned Nigerian artist. They arrived together. He did not hold her hand ostentatiously, but his posture, the way he guided her with a touch at the small of his back, the way he leaned down to hear her comments on the art, spoke volumes to the sharp-eyed Lagos elite in attendance. The photographs that appeared in the society section the next day were telling. There was no caption about the nanny. Instead, the headline read, Chief Okonkwo and companion enjoy an evening of art. It was a first subtle shot across the bow. The true test came from Tola. A few weeks into their proper courtship, she grew quiet and withdrawn. Ifeoma found her in her room, staring miserably at her mother's picture. When you and Daddy get married, Tola whispered, her voice thick with tears. Will you stop being our Ifeoma? Will you want to have your own babies and forget us? Ifeoma's heart broke. She gathered Tola into her arms. Oh, my sweet girl, listen to me. My heart is not a small room. It is a very, very big house. There is a huge, beautiful room in it that belongs only to you and Toby. That room was built the first day I met you, and it will be there forever. Nothing and no one can ever change that. If I love your daddy, and if he loves me, it doesn't mean I take love away from you. It means our family's house gets even bigger, with more rooms for more love. Do you understand? Tola had hugged her tightly, the fear in her eyes replaced by a dawning relief. The metaphor, simple and profound, became a touchstone for them all. The final, public announcement was made at the annual Children's Hope Foundation Charity Ball, an event deeply personal to Ademola as it supported orphans. He knew the setting would send a clear message about his priorities. They arrived as a family. Ademola in a tailored black agbada, Ifeoma breathtaking in a gown of deep navy usoke that rivaled any Parisian design, its elegance speaking to her heritage rather than trying to hide it. Toby and Tola, beaming with pride, held their hands. As they took their place at the head table, the whispers in the room were a palpable force. Ademola ignored them. Halfway through the evening, during his speech, he paused after thanking the donors. And finally, he said, his voice projecting across the silent ballroom, "There are 3 people here without whom I would be lost. My children, Toby and Tola, my greatest treasures." The spotlight found the twins, who waved shyly, and the woman who helped me find my way back to them, who has brought light, laughter, and love back into our home. My partner and my fiancée, Ifeoma. The spotlight swung to her. For a second, Ifeoma's composure wavered under the blinding light and the gasp that rippled through the crowd. But then she smiled, a picture of grace and quiet confidence, and reached for Ademola's hand. The cameras exploded, capturing not a scandal, but a story. A family, whole and radiant. Back in the Ikoyi mansion, the silence was forever banished. It was replaced by a new, vibrant symphony. The percussion of Toby's feet running down the hall to show Ifeoma a new drawing. The melody of Tola's laughter as she practiced dance steps. The rich, warm harmony of Ademola's contented sigh as he sat in his armchair, not reading, but simply listening to the life around him. And weaving through it all, the steady, beautiful rhythm of Ifeoma's presence. Her calm voice, her intelligent insights, her loving touch. The museum was gone. In its place was a home, filled not with priceless artifacts, but with immeasurable joy. Ademola had built an empire from nothing, but his greatest fortune, the one that truly mattered, had been there all along, waiting to be seen. Not in a boardroom, but in the heart of the woman who had taught them all how to love again. The symphony played on, a beautiful, chaotic, perfect song of a family found.